So I'm Joanna. I'm the head of coaching at Mayday. I work with our various coaching teams, and I'll be talking a little bit about the different areas that we work within. But I also work alongside our partners and within our membership just to look at how we're working together and about our model. Since it was created and developed by the Mayday Trust, the PTS, so the person-led transitional strength-based response, has evolved and adapted for different spaces and contexts. It all started with listening. And why did we start listening? Over a decade ago, funding changes were on the horizon. Mayday were in the homeless industry, the old supporting people contracts. I don't know if there's anyone here who remembers that. They funded almost everything, and that was being questioned. The government were dropping quite big hints that people were going to lose their recourse to statutory support. So Mayday also became aware of the conveyor belt people were on. People might stop working with Mayday, but then often the same people would return. The board and Pat, our previous CEO, realized that both conversations were linked, funding and the revolving door of services. So in 2011, we led a qualitative review of over 100 people inside and outside Mayday Trust in order to understand people's experiences and thoughts of services that were designed to help them into and moving through accommodation. People reported that often they felt no autonomy, they felt managed and dehumanized. Can I have the next slide, please, Tabby? So the research told us that there were three key elements. Focusing on weaknesses didn't work, evidencing achievement, building internal motivation to change, and highlighting strengths and success moves people into more sustainable change. From our research and realizing the current system has a deficit focus, we decided to work in a different way. Our work is person-led, focused, and strength-based, and based on strengths and personal assets. And this is a little slide, I guess, to just show you the three key areas. We identify and work towards goals and changes that are meaningful to people. We connect or reconnect with others, explore and even build their own community or community groups, as we're seeing with some of our work in East Northamptonshire, and challenge what's not working and even help shape better services. So we currently have the ears of an NHS trust in London, where we are supporting them in changing and looking at their services. Next slide, please, Tabby. Thank you. So because we realized that those three key elements are not working for people, in 2013, we started working in a new way and have since developed and improved the work that we do. For example, it took until 2018 before we started honing in on system barriers and really understanding how systems were failing people. And I have to admit that the work keeps developing. The PTS is going into different areas, and we're constantly considering how approach may have to vary and how the embedding of it in various systems. So our work is informed by the core concepts of person-led transitional strength-based response. Those are developmental assets. You can find that information on the Search Institute's website, and that's based on people having external and internal assets. On advantage thinking, which you can find by looking for the Foyer Federation, and that's where we understood the evidence around focusing on strengths rather than weaknesses, and most importantly, relationships and purpose. And there's no one specific place to find that. If you just put those words on Google, you will have a million hits on different theories and pieces of evidence that put the relationship as being fundamental to everything that is important to being human. Our key interventions have been coaching, and we'll be speaking to one of our wonderful coaches, Mel, quite soon. Brokering, which is about seeking out and exploring relevant opportunities and interests available to people in the wider community. So people no longer receiving or being a part of groups that are within systems, but more what is available in the community and what fits that person best. And the other part is building positive networks. So we all have our relationships with people that are important in our lives. I'm sure that if I asked you, you could think of 5 people that you've spoken to this week or you spent time this week who are part of your family, your community, your work, your network, volunteering. But for people who are going through systems, that often isn't the case. And that's part of the work that a coach does. Over the last few years, we've worked with young people, people with long-term health conditions, people in hostels or in temporary accommodation, most recently people navigating the NHS or mental health services. Our response has adapted and keeps growing, but one thing that has remained is our work is the relationships. Tabby, could I get the next slide, please? Thank you. So last year, the New Economics Foundation published a report on the PTS response. It was based on a 2-year evaluation with working of Hampshire and that of our partner Changing Lives in Newcastle. The evaluation found that the regular time spent with the coach provided human connection, and for many, this was the first step to getting themselves out of isolation and reducing their depression and anxiety. We can put a link in the chat with that report. But it goes to highlight how important the coaching relationship is, irrespective of whatever context we've ever put the PTS in. And we feel that when you put the relationship at the forefront of anything that we do, everything else follows. And I just wanted to introduce you to our coach, Mel. So if I could take the slides off and introduce Mel, that would be great. And have flown through those slides because it's really important that you are all part of this or understand the conversation from the coach's perspective. So Mel, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the coaching areas that you work within?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Mel and I've been a Mayday coach for about 1.5 years now. I work in Northampton and Wellingborough, predominantly with people living in temporary accommodation, and we've also started working within the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Mel. So over the last 1.5 years, what have you learned about the coaching relationship? Why is it important?
Yeah, so I think that by nature, we're all social beings and relationships have a big impact on us. And being in the system doesn't change that. So that knowing that you have someone in your corner, someone validating you, but also someone that you can have challenging conversations with, as there's no judgment, really helps to build confidence and self-esteem.
Fantastic. I also know that I was a coach myself, that reflecting on a person's achievements, it often isn't space within services to do that. Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, so I think it's not easy to see how far you've come when it's yourself. So having a coach reflecting that back at you just really brings it to the forefront. So for example, someone that I'm coaching, she struggles to get outside, and she hasn't seen that we've been meeting regularly and we've been going out, and still I think when she's struggling, she doesn't see how far that we have come. So yeah, I just reflect that back to her.
And I'm sure that moves things forward. We were discussing as a coaching team how sometimes people internalize the labels that they've been given, and how coaching kind of mirrors back that sense of you're not defined by that thing. And I'm wondering if that really helped in this coaching relationship.
Yeah, definitely, because I think in that exercise that it just showed that those labels that we have are not necessarily affecting us every day. But with people in services, it's literally like stamped on their forehead. And so it's important to let them know that they're not that label.
And do you think that comes from creating a trusting relationship?
Yeah, definitely. I think having a trusting relationship is like the start of being able to fully be who you truly are.
Brilliant. And how would you say you've created trusting relationships with people?
So I think it's always doing what I say I'm going to do, just giving people the space to talk and to vent what and just do whatever they need to do, and still being there for them, because I think people often they might be a little bit angry one day, and then they might think that I'm not going to be coming back because of that, because that's what they're used to. So it's just like reassuring them that I'm still going to be there.
Yeah, I guess people sometimes get sanctioned for showing emotion, so you can't be too angry if you present at a service, otherwise you might not be committed or banned. So with the PTS, the first part is person-led. And what I've learned about the PTS is that it's not copy and paste. So could you give me two contrasting examples of like what person-led means? Like two people have been referred from the same organization or they're in the same situation, but what's person-led about each one?
Yeah, so I think one person that I was coaching, he said that he was ready to go back to work. We just had a discussion about what he enjoyed doing. And then we put together a CV, and we did mock interviews. And then we went and we picked out some clothes that he would, because he got an interview. So we went and picked out some clothes that he felt that he would be confident in. And then it's just, he rang me just before the interview just to have a little pep talk, and then afterwards just to see how things were going. And then another person, as I said, the person who struggles to get out, is something that she really wanted to work on. So we've just been taking the time and taking things at her own pace, going for walks together and finding places that she feels comfortable visiting alone.
That's fantastic. So it's quite interesting that you would assume, and most services do, that someone is referred by one organization and therefore you have like an action plan with like, this is that person's path and this is that person's path, and it's quite similar. How do you find, following someone's, because I'm naturally quite a fixie person. We all go into these jobs because we want to make things better for people. So how do you find that in your coaching relationships?
Yeah, I think by nature, I also am a fixer. And coming from services type of work environment, it was a lot of unlearning to do. And just seeing that me just swooping in every time and doing everything, it's not really helpful for the person in the long term. So for me, trying to be helpful, in the end, it's not going to be that helpful.
Yeah, thank you. So because the person-led bit means that it's quite a varied approach, and when you're looking at someone's strengths, they're also very different. Each person's different. Why is having this varied approach important?
Yeah, I think like you were saying, services tend to put everyone in one basket and offer one solution. But in reality, we all have different journeys and different solutions to similar problems. So treating people as individuals helps them to not just feel like another number, and that they really matter.
Yeah, because I've noticed that people's self-esteem tends to grow when they feel like their own journey and their own path is respected. And do you think that that helps people achieve their own goals?
Yeah, definitely. Because if we're following them on what they actually want to do and not what's been put upon them, then it gains a massive sense of achievement.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. So you, before coming to Mayday, and we're kind of going a bit off piste here, you worked in a more traditional service. What would you say is the difference between what you were doing there and what you do now as a coach
Yeah,
and
so
working in a strength-based way?
yeah, I think one of the main differences is we're not focused on outcomes. That's like the starting point. Just ticking boxes and making sure everything's ticked on the box. Um, and there's just we have a lot of time now, just to really get to know people and work on what they want to achieve, but not in like a pressure-filled way. And then the objectives come after.
Brilliant. And then some people would assume that that this kind of work takes a really long time, but I know that relationships can vary from a matter of like months to a year. What's been your experience of that?
Yeah, I think as it's person-led, everyone has their own. Some people come with like a set goal that they need to achieve, and it's like a short-term thing, and other people it's more longer term, and it's just, yeah, working very varied.
Brilliant. Mel, thank you very much for joining me on this Zoom call. We will have some questions. We'll be open to questions later, so hopefully you'll join me for that. So this really highlights the difference between the two ways of working. And I guess what we want to unpick later on is how do we start practicing in a more strength-based way? How do we give people more autonomy, build trust, in terms of what the support offer looks like? How do we give people that sense of they're the captains of their own ship? What sort of opportunities can we find that are real-time opportunities, not opportunities that are defined by what a service thinks is good? So for example, a homelessness art club, put my hand up, I've been responsible for setting stuff like that up, and people feel like they have to go because that's the only thing on offer. But it's how do we then broker the opportunity for someone who is an artist, who wants to go to, say, college or university, or has already done those things and wants to reconnect with it. And then when services don't work, that the person doesn't feel penalized for it or that they're taking blame, but more, what is it about the service that doesn't work? What is the thing that's most appropriate? The work that we're doing at the moment, the NHS, and one of my colleagues at Mayday is really let people create their own better health plans. Like what does a good health look like, and what do I need to get there when certain services within the NHS haven't worked for them? And we're working with commissioners to really look at how we fund that. And what we are finding is that there's huge savings to be had if someone can create their own journey and the definition what a good life looks like. Thank you, Tabby. That's everything. There are a couple more slides in there that we will make available to you after, but I'm going to hand over to Ollie now.
Great, thank you. Sorry if there's movement behind me. I'm just in our office, which is a nice change from working at home, but it's a bit different. So I'm just going to very quickly share my screen. Oh, I can't do that. So if Tabby could share mine, that would be my presentation. That would be good. I'm just going to talk through about how we've adopted and adapted the PTS response within Platform. So just while the slide's coming up, I will tell you a little bit about us as an organisation. We're a mental health organisation based in Wales. Our mission is for mental health and social change. So a long time ago, we realized that we are working with people in situations of real distress and disconnection. And it was really hard for us to deal with the kind of challenges faced by people without really facing up to the fact that we live in a broken society, which doesn't really provide the safety net or the connection for people who are really struggling. And that's really where we're coming from, and why the PTS approach became so important to us as an organisation. So if you could move on to the next slide, Tabby, I will ad-lib slightly. So we really went to the basics of what PTS means, and we like to translate it into kind of plain English, I suppose, if we can say that, but into words that kind of tell us what it actually means. So we describe it as talking with people about what they want, listening to what they say, and then working with them as they do it. And that's become our sort of guiding principle of coaching within Platform. Next slide, please, Tabby. And the next again. Sorry, this is going to get very old. So our view of mental health, which is backed up by the World Health Organization, a lot of other evidence base, is that at its most simple, mental health is your nervous system regulation, plus the connection you have with yourself, others, and the world. So what do we mean by that? Well, essentially, it's really difficult for us to have relationships, to have connections with people if we are in a state of overwhelm. So the example I use, which is always a bit tongue-in-cheek, but hopefully it will help to demonstrate. I've got a massive phobia of spiders. If I'm trying to have a really important presentation, such as a new System Alliance Strengths-Based Approaches presentation on Thursday, if there's a massive spider crawling towards me on the table, I will find it really difficult to piece my words together. You might see me sweating, you might see me stumbling over my words. And that's because I've got into a sense of flight or fright. And that makes it really difficult because you enter that state of overwhelm, dysregulation. That's fine though, because that spider can be removed quite easily, so that the cause of that overwhelm is no longer there. But if you are sustaining that sense of overwhelm, maybe since you were a child, maybe if you consider that trauma, I won't go into this too much, but trauma can be inherited. If you're saturated with inequality, poverty, and trauma, then it's really difficult to just remove the spider. So what that means is we have a group of people who are consistently and constantly dysregulated and overwhelmed. And it's people in that situation who the coaching works really well for, and that's the space that Platform tries to occupy. Next slide, please, Tabby. So to understand our mental health, we need to go deeper. And so recently, and I will share this in the chat after the presentation, Platform has published a manifesto for social change. And that's really looking at the fact that mental health, despite the well-meaning myth, does not impact 1 in 4 of us equally across the population. Mental health will impact more of us by far who are experiencing poverty, inequality, or trauma. And therefore, once you come to that conclusion, it becomes even more apparent that we need to take urgent action to address the structural inequalities. Some of that is about social change, about campaigning, and about lobbying, but also some of it is doing work with people, not for them, on the ground, to give them the skills so that they can challenge these kind of structural causes themselves. Next slide, please. So again, this is kind of demonstrating some of where we're situated. And for us, a lot of this comes down to, so the ways that you can overcome kind of entrenched inequality, poverty in terms of the way they cause mental health is through relationships, connection, and regulation. But it's really difficult, as you can see from this diagram, when you see how much feeds into that state of dysregulation. The idea that we as an organization or a coach can come in and fix all of that is just obviously clearly laughable. There's absolutely no way that could work. And in a sense, this is why the whole fixing approach that traditional services have largely used is largely going to just patch up. The example I've often used with our coaches, I say often, I've started to use recently, Rachel chuckle, is our coaches within Platform are like drivers of forklift trucks around flood prevention. They'll dig the moats around people's homes. Traditional tenancy support might provide the sandbags. Now, you do need the sandbag sometimes because someone needs that initial emergency intervention, but actually most of the time what people need is decent flood defences. Now, flood defences are not my policy expertise, so that's where I'll leave that metaphor. Yeah, thanks, Tabby. That next slide is great. So, ecological systems theory, that's kind of where we situated kind of the way we work within Platform. So the individual, as you can see, is influenced by all of these concentric circles, and often the dysregulation and overwhelm that people feel put barriers in place of accessing all of those resources that lots of us take for granted. In addition, those things around us provide influence. So you can influence outside in terms of connecting to those parts of the circle, but those parts of the circle also influence the individual. The next slide as well. So this is just to summarize as well. So you can only be as regulated as the people you interact with. And I would add also the services, the systems, society, the structures that you interact with on a daily basis. One of the things we talk about a lot within Platform is also about around adverse community experiences. So one of the things that our coaches are really trying to do is reconnect people, not just to relationships they care about, but to communities, to hobbies, to interests. But crucially, and as kind of Joanna and Mel have quite so clearly articulated, is exactly trying to connect people to things that they choose. So it's not about us deciding that they must connect with, I don't know, the homelessness choir or the local dance group. It's led by what people want. You'll also notice that I'm not talking too much about the PTS as a concept, because that's also been covered a lot by Joanna and Mel. So the next element of kind of, I suppose, the theoretical framework we use around our PTS service, our asset coach service, as we call it, is this pyramid of need. So a lot of the time when, and this is largely just reiterating what I was saying about that sense of regulation, that sense of overwhelm, if you're not feeling safe, it's really difficult to develop relations. If you're not developing relations, it's really difficult to find that comfort and co-regulation. So as you can see, even though people won't necessarily go through this triangle in an ordered way, it's just a framework. It's not a definite thing that people have to progress through that triangle. A lot of what our crisis services do across the UK and the Western world is we try and engage people straight away at the point of trauma. So they're about to be made homeless, they're in a mental health crisis, they are currently using substances to cope. And we try and engage people at that sharp end of the trauma, rather than taking a step back and creating that sense of safety, that sense of regulation, emotional regulation. I can see the chat very briefly kind of occasionally popping up. So by regulation, we mean emotional mental health regulation, so that people can feel are able to process their emotions in a way that doesn't harm them or others around them. Next slide, please, Tabby. This is one just that I remember Mayday talking about. So it's something that I use a lot is the idea of who you might call if you're going through a crisis. And one of the things I remember a Mayday Trust colleague saying is that when they first did a wisdoms with people across the organisation, they asked people, who would you call in that crisis? And, you know, I always ask my team this as well. So for me, it's my husband, my mum, some colleagues, friends, you know, and I would get to 5 people quite quickly. But when we ask people who've been systematized, who have been essentially broken by the system, you know, not to be to put too fine a point on it, people tend to come back with my mental health nurse, my probation officer, my support worker, my social worker. And so it's no wonder really why people keep coming back to the system. Firstly, because there's a lack of real meaningful non-paid connection in their lives. And secondly, when they hit that crisis again, the only people that they have got experience supporting with them with that are paid for by the system. So there's a natural pull back into the system. Next slide, Tabby. So this is therefore the theoretical framework that we use for coaching, and it's all based on trying to connect people back into the communities of their choice, and that's the key thing. But it's also aware that actually some communities don't have the resources because of our post-society arrangement. So in parts of Wales where we're based, you will have communities where there is significant economic deprivation, ex-coal mines, farming communities, where communities have been left behind. And they have been vastly and negatively impacted by austerity and the resulting kind of loss of services and connection to that. Now, by that, I don't mean that there needs to be a service for everything, but by that I mean that there may not be a local library, there may not be a community centre, there may be a lack of green spaces, there may not be jobs, there may not be volunteering opportunities. So trying to connect people independently of understanding the ecological systems theory is doomed to failure. So that's why we've put this in as a cycle. We support the individual to progress through the pyramid of need. We help connect them through ecological systems theory to their communities of choice. And then we go back to the individual and keep supporting them until they are ready to move on. Next slide, please, Tabby. So I won't go into this too much, but this is a training exercise, again, that Mayday Trust have inspired me to do, which is actually considering how you can help someone in this situation without fixing anything. The short answer is you can't really, until you start asking different questions and you start asking what people care about. So the next slide, please, Tabby. So there we go. You've now got different information. And this is what Rachel and her team of coaches will start doing. And as you can see, we've zoomed up the picture to say the young koala's mental health problem. Actually, deforestation in that instance is causing that koala the problem. In the same instance, actually, this person that we might work with has got a huge amount of assets, huge amount of interests that they might be able to connect to. But they've been told repeatedly that they are just diabetic, they are just a substance user, they are just someone who's failed. So that's where we see a big part of our role within Platform, is really building that connection back to what people care about. Next slide. So I've breezed through that really quickly because I wanted to try and keep us a little bit to time, but I just wanted to bring in Rach really. So Rach is our asset coach manager, working across a few different local authorities in Wales who've commissioned us to deliver coaching. And very similar to Joanna and Mel, I was just going to ask a few questions. So hello, Rach, and thanks for coming today. I was just wondering if you wanted to introduce yourself quickly and tell people a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so I work at Platform. As I said, the asset coach manager. I also am a coach as well. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Great. And one of my, well, lots of favourite things about Rach, but one of my favourites is when she became a manager, she deliberately kept working with people. So I think that's really important as well. So really keeping in with how it works, being on the ground with coaches as well. So I'll try not to ask all the same questions that Joanna asked, but why does it feel different to you? And I suppose your background was supported accommodation, wasn't it, before coaching, Rach? I was just wondering, yeah, what feels different about this?
Yeah, so I came over to Platform after working many, many years in supported housing, and then joined one of our tenancy teams originally before joining coaching. And so, you know, I worked in the two different ways. And for me, it's just being free from the rules. You know, on tenancy, you've got your allowable activities, you're governed by your commissioners, you know, there are things you can, there's rules, you can't do this, you can't do that. And for us, we just ripped up our rule book and yeah, we just do it. Basically, yeah, it's just having that freedom. So I think it's been difficult to sort of have that freedom and not want to go into that fixing, because I think, you know, for us that, you know, doing that fixing role is that gratification for us. You know, you get that feel good factor because you're doing something, and to move away from that and to sort of sit with sort of silences as well, you know, discomfort of, right, I know that, you know, we're having these conversations and somebody is saying, maybe they've got debts, for instance, that they want to work on. And, you know, for us as coaches, we know that if they do it, go in this direction, you know, that solution will happen far more quickly than if they went in the direction they want to. And I think sometimes that's difficult to sit with that, but I think it's knowing the person has all that information and they're making that choice, and it's that supporting that choice that sometimes can be difficult. You know, it isn't all sort of plain sailing with coaching, you know, there are those difficult conversations.
Yeah, definitely. and you've just won the team chuckle at me because I talk about sitting with the discomfort a lot. So Rachel's just said it before me today, which is good. I think as well, one of the big things for me has been understanding that people might not want to change in the way we want to change. For example, one of the people that we've had amazing kind of progress with has, made such progress, but not in a way that we can actually kind of say anything on an outcomes form. So the example I often use is someone who's now out and about in the community, but has managed to do that not by making official progress with his substance use, but actually by shifting substances to something that allows him to live his life in a different way. Now, putting that on an outcomes form is really hard, but that person is now engaged in their community in a much more positive way. So that's the kind of thing that coaching can do, is it can kind of get the kind of broken rubble out of the way, I suppose, stop you jumping through hoops. So in terms of thinking like that, Rachel, I know you've talked about the fixing. So what was your biggest challenge about kind of addressing that, and how did you do it, just for anyone watching?
I think for me, it was the slow pace of the way coaching works. Like I said, traditional support work, you are very busy, you're very active, it's very a doing role. And I think because I'd done it for such a long time, for me, it was really difficult to sit back and not be busy. And I found that difficult at first. Yeah. But then, it's that was the one thing that I did find difficult, is that that not being busy, and seeing your colleagues then in other services doing those things, being busy. I think that's what I found the most difficult.
Yeah, and we had a really interesting reflection on this a few last week or 2 weeks ago, where actually it's a different kind of busy, I think, is the way we described it, because you're always thinking about the next steps. You're always trying to think about what resources are available in the local community that they can connect to. You're always thinking about how best to kind of provide some of that coaching support, but you're not phoning the DWP, you're not trying to phone to sort out rent arrears with the housing associations. So even though actually you work with the same caseloads, you have good successes, if you can call it that, in terms of outcomes, we try and stop talking about that as much as we can. It's about a different pace, isn't it? So still busy, but that different pace. And trying to work with coaches to let them know it's okay to slow down, to take the time to listen to the person is really important as well. So I'm going to just ask one more question because I'm aware of time. So what advice would you give to anyone wanting to work this way, or set up a coaching service, or work in a strengths-based way?
Just go for it. No, I think just know that there will be that discomfort, and I think as well, people have found it difficult to understand what coaching is, and it's taken us a long time within Platform for our colleagues to understand. But you see those changes happen, and I think a massive thing for me, which I'm just so proud of, is seeing my colleagues changing the way that they're working. They're seeing coaching and understanding that this is the way we should be working, and they are constrained by allowable activities and outcomes and things like that, but they've adapted paperwork, they've kept the paperwork that they do write down all the deficit based questions, they've got rid of so many things. And that's what I've loved about it. It's
amazing.
Just no changes in people.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that's the bit that I suppose I haven't focused on a huge amount in this presentation, is around the system change and challenge, because obviously that's why we're doing it as well. And one of the things I think made a difference to the coaches a couple of weeks ago when we had our away day is actually, yes, you can do system change on big grand scales, but actually changing the system for people one at a time can also realise just by demonstrating that there's a different way. We've already made changes internally within Platform. We've already made changes with kind of people in their communities. The thing that I would, I suppose, finish on, so thanks Rach for the firstly is for talking, and I'm sure you'll stay around in the breakout rooms and you can kind of share your experience there. Is that for a lot of the time people have been told by the whole system that they are a failure, that they are not engaging in the right way, that they are hard to engage, that they don't matter really unless they fit into a particular box, and that's why actually for sometimes the coaching approach can feel quite lonely, but it can also feel amazing because you are being sometimes the first person that someone has listened to in their whole life, someone who's actually focused on their strengths rather than their failures, someone who cares about and is rooted in their local community as well, someone who's not imposed from the top. So there's a lot more that we could talk about, but it is only a showcase rather than a full exploration. So we've got 15 minutes before we finish. So I think if I come to breakout room number 1 first for someone to feedback, let's say just a few 30 seconds maybe. Let's not go into too much detail because then we can open it out to comments from the floor if that's okay.
How do we know which breakout room we're in?
That's a very good question, Steph. I'm hoping that when people were put into breakout rooms they may have noted. So tell you what, if I come to Joy, who is in my group, and then whoever decided to feedback from each of their groups, just raise your hand and I'll call you. There we go. Joy.
Thanks. Yeah, so we barriers that were mentioned included expectations that housing would be the focus when actually for some people that might not be their top priority, but it was difficult for services to advocate for not focusing on housing. There was conversation about the importance of community relating to street homelessness. High caseloads was another barrier, people not being able to take the time for that relational approach, and striving to demonstrate that outcomes had been achieved could take the focus away from the person and onto the outcomes. That's probably 30 seconds, I think.
Great, thank you, Joy. I know that's cruel to ask people to do that, but it does mean we get longer for discussions. So who was next nominated? If people can raise their hands, I'll call them.
Should I go just because I'm here?
Yeah, go for it,
and we didn't actually discuss it in our group who would feedback. So, and there are a lot of people more capable of doing this, so jump in, anyone from my group. But we generally had a conversation that themed around being strength-based within a very deficit-based system, and how there's even a term of misery mapping and the welfare state being built on deficits. And so even when you have a strength-based approach in place, you often get pulled back in. We looked at ways of how we might overcome this, so stripping back and going back to your values, but often that's a very ideal world. Time, the system goes at a very big pace and on time. Sue in our group spoke about how she works in social care with people who are on ticking clock before they turn 18, to which they are transferred onto adult services, and so it's almost would be impossible to slow down because that deadline's not going anywhere. And also Sharon discussed how as a team they are working in a strength-based way, but the wider organisation may not be strength-based, so that's a pull in itself. But just going back to Sue's point, and also Sarah brought out about Cormac Russell's work, starting with what's strong and not what's wrong. We looked at how quite often the system is a crisis response, and it won't listen to you until you're at that crisis response, until you maybe perhaps see yourself as a victim, and how we overcome that. And maybe there's small things that might create change. But yeah, the biggest barrier, shocker, was the system.
Thanks, Steph. We definitely didn't plan it like that for that to be the answer, but obviously, Paul, I can see you've got your hand up as well. Thank you.
So I think we covered some similar areas. We talked a bit about commissioners and their expectations and about having to tick boxes to get paid. and having to get paid in order to be able to survive and run the service, about the expectations of people who are using the service as well, and that at times their expectations can be that you're going to tackle that deficit that they're coming talking about. And I'm just trying to think what else that we covered. That's probably 30 seconds.
Great, thank you, Paul. Was there anyone else who wanted to comment? Oh, there we go, Alex. Thank you.
Yeah, we talked about some fairly similar things, but a few things that sort of just stood out for me was the conversation about busyness versus purpose. So what's actually being created that's of value, and that's about not just what the worker's doing, but what the people that they're working with are doing as well. And so we sort of were hearing about sometimes taking that different kind of approach enables people to the people are actually doing more, even if the worker isn't quite as frantic. And we've got a sort of cult of franticness because that's how most people work in public services, but it's not actually necessarily related to impact and purpose. And we talked about learning organisations and that idea of a fixed strategy, that organisations and a fixed plan and sort of being very clear about exactly what we're going to do can actually pull in the opposite direction to being an organisation that's constantly learning and iterating and innovating and changing and listening to people. Talked about keeping it simple, not adding more complexity to people's lives when they were already complex, and think lots was going on. So actually, how can we support people that in a way that just goes step by step with them, rather than adding stuff that might seem useful to us but isn't useful to them. And then I think one last thing that came out was about outcomes, and the idea that we should be really interested and we want to learn about what kind of impact we have and what the outcomes are, but actually we need to keep that away from the practice. So we're hearing about the sort of how an organisation could keep the analysis of the outcomes sort of with that was what the managers were working with, but they were deliberately not kind of constantly going into outcomes with the people that with their workers, because actually they wanted the workers focused on the relationships. So the outcomes were used for learning rather than for control.
Great, thanks, Alex. And yeah, we raised a very similar point around just that. Often the managers need to be the buffers. We talked a lot, I know Joy talked about it, about the fear. The whole system is saturated in fear, but whether it's providers' fear of dropping the ball or not reaching outcomes, not maintaining funding, not winning bids, whether it's commissioners' fear about being overspent in budget, whether they're meeting regulation, fear is throughout the whole system. So the more that managers and leaders can kind of buffer that from people doing the work on the ground, the better. And yeah, that's brilliant. So I think we don't have a huge amount of time, so we always think we've got longer for discussion than we do. But does anyone have, and please feel free to share stuff in the chat, or does anyone have any observations, thoughts they want to share at this stage? And I know we're coming just before lunch, but I'll look out for hands just in case. And one of the good things about having done coaching training is I've learned to become really comfortable in difficult silences. But that's fine. Okay, so it looks like people are kind of ready to kind of finish. I'll just finish in a question. One of the is actually, what would people most value from the New System Alliance in terms of next steps, some of the things you've discovered? So please feel free to type that answer to that question in the chat, because we'd really like to know. I think for next steps, one of the things we're really keen on this year is to really generate practical outcomes from these conversations. So we will be trying to structure future events where possible around some of the questions that you've posed, because what we don't want to do is pull at the seam. We don't want to throw all these threads up in the air and then leave them for people. So part of these conversations are there to give you space to think, space to reflect, space to consider how it might make changes within your own systems, your own services. But the other opportunity is for us to just learn from each other as well. So what I really value about this space is hearing from a range of people across the United Kingdom, you know, who operate in different policy environments. So in Wales, we have a very different set of legislation than in England and Scotland. But there's some really interesting findings, I think, from all of these conversations, is that a lot of the problems, a lot of the challenges, the barriers are still the same. You know, I could talk to a provider in England or Scotland and the same issues around commissioning and kind of outcomes would always come forward. And I think the same challenges and pressures that local authorities face would still be the same. So yeah, that's our commitment to you, I suppose, is we'll try and follow this up with blogs, discussions and future events. Please do get in touch with us in between. We're always really welcome your different perspectives. If you'd like to present on something you're doing in your organisation around strengths-based approaches, we'd love to hear from you. So this first one obviously is from Mayday Trust, who created the PTS response and platform, who are adopting it in a different area. But genuinely, we're a broad organisation, a gathering of organisations, I should say. So if you've got an idea you want to share, just get in touch with us. I'm going to ask Steph if she can share the email address for people to contact us on, because yeah, we'd love to have you present on what you're doing and build that alliance together. The final thing is I will then pass on to Steph. I think I did give you some notice, Steph, hopefully, but it may have been lost in the chat, just to run through some of the forthcoming events. But that's the last you'll hear from me today. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and I will pass you over to Steph.
Thanks, I must have missed that memo, but that's absolutely fine. We've got some really exciting events coming up, but the biggest one, next one that will be launching soon, is one on housing first, which we've been really excited to get our teeth stuck into for quite a while. We will be joined by Homeless Link as well, so it should be a really interesting discussion. We'll follow it up. We've obviously recorded this today, and so what we'll do is we'll follow it up when we send out the link. We'll also send you the information how you can join the next one, which should be really nice and juicy. So yeah, watch this space. But that's a big plug from me.
I shouldn't have promised it was the last thing, because I realise we need someone to say goodbye, don't we? So thank you, everyone. You can now leave. You've got my permission to go. We will see you at the next one, hopefully. And please stay in touch in the meantime. We'd love to hear from you about what you're doing. And have a lovely rest of the Thursday.